gathering in their literal tens outside the front door of Natter Towers to get in. In fact, we had 60 viewers waiting before I pressed the go button. That's very exciting. Hello, everyone in the chat. Hello, particularly to one of tonight's guests, Matt. Matt is in the chat. So, everyone. Matt, I hope you're recovering, Matt. Matt has been wiped out by some sort of plague of some kind, but hopefully is recovering. So, Joseph, Joe has been left behind to pick up the pieces and deliver what is a substantial amount of content, everyone. There's a lot. We've got a lot of fun stuff to get through tonight because it's episode 178. How do you build a modern train simulator game? That was the cold open, and this is the inside of a Class 158, which is the train I grew up with when I was a kid. Lots of people grew up with steam trains. No, not me. 158s are what I grew up with, and this is the view outside of one. I think possibly sat in Manchester Victoria Station, which is fun. With some very new OLE for the OLE nerds out there. Some very new, shiny looking OLE over the top. Anyway, I digress, because in the background, waiting in the wings, having been ushered out of the green room and with his pockets full of biscuits and free champagne, which we don't deliver, is Joseph Roger. Joe is joined us. Joe is in the background waiting for us to begin the episode. Tonight we're talking about how to build a modern train simulator, and there's so much to get through. I'm just going to get us moving. Everyone, welcome to tonight's Rail Natter. And as the Intercity 225 fades away, there's some people saying they're getting an audio echo. Hopefully not too much. Let me know if the sound is... Are you getting an audio echo, Joe? Is it all right your end?
I'm all good, my end.
Oh, good, everyone. Okay. It might... hopefully. Well, anyway, in the chat can update me with that. Anyway, before we talk about Dovetail Games and what Dovetail Games is, we are first going to ask, who is Joseph Roger, which we can do by me pressing this button and saying, hello, Joe. Joe, hello. Welcome to Railnar. A pleasure to have you.
Hi, Gareth. Yeah, hi, everyone. This is super exciting. Yeah, I'm very glad to be here.
Joe, firstly, so the elephant in the room is that Matt was going to be joining us for this chat. And as we said, yeah, Matt has got some sort of plague, but has very happily joined in the chat. So if you have questions for Matt, everyone, Matt's in the chat. Matt plays TV in the YouTube chat. You can ask Matt. But Joe, tell us what you do at Dovetail, and then we'll talk about what on earth Dovetail Games is.
Yeah, so hi Matt as well, if you're in the chat. I'm Joe Rogers, and as it says on the screen there, I'm the brand manager for Dovetail Games, or a brand manager for Dovetail Games. So I deal primarily with Train Sim World. I've worked at Dovetail Games for about 3 years, but I've actually worked in the railway hobby for almost a decade now. I previously worked for a Heritage Railway, and then before that I worked for a railway modelling company, so I know trains pretty well. But my day-to-day job basically involves brand managing Train Sim World. So that's, a lot of marketing stuff, a lot of communications, some of the articles that some of our fans read on Dovetail Live, they'll have been written by me about some of the content that we release, like add-ons and also the core games as well. There's a lot involved, but it's all good fun. And I, like everyone at Dovetail Games, loves trains. So that's the important thing, really.
That's always tonight is indeed a good one for train fans. So let's return to the slide deck and ask the obvious question, which is tell us a bit about Dovetail Games. Let's start off. This, for everyone watching, this isn't going to be a sales pitch. This is about train simulation, but it makes sense to ask. I like context, and the context certainly is what is the developer that we're currently talking about, and so tell us about Dovetail Games.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important place to start because particularly people in the railway hobby, if you're a keen modeler or maybe you're a volunteer on a heritage railway or something, video games might not be the immediate, hobby that you go to. Whereas there's a lot to gain from in the video games world when it comes to trains. So yeah, Dovetail Games, we started out way back in about 2009 under the name railsimulator.com Limited. Then we rebranded to Dovetail Games in 2013. Primarily, the main focus of a lot of that time has been what's now known as Train Simulator Classic. Originally, it was known as Railworks, and then Train Simulator. And then in more recent years, we developed a different trains video game, which was Train Sim World, and we'll discuss a little bit about the difference between those two, I'm sure, at some point. But we also do other stuff. Our tagline or our motto that we go by is "By enthusiasts, for enthusiasts," and that's because we're all enthusiasts in the company. And as you can see by the number of titles we've got there, that's not just trains. We do digital board games. If you're a board games fan, you probably recognise Catan there. It's quite a popular board game. And we also do fishing games as well. So again, that sort of hobbyist area, pastime, fishing, trains, though they're completely different, actually they have quite strong communities and quite strong followings, and we make video games based off of those, basically.
Yeah, it's that the sense of responsibility to an enthusiastic group of enthusiasts throws up a lot of challenges, I can imagine. Yeah, so that's Dovetail Games. Briefly, we'll come back, and I'm sure through the episode we'll pick up more on kind of what the organization looks like and how it works. But first of all, so by the way, everyone, this peek behind the curtain. There is so much interesting content that we've been thrown to show you all. So I've just put them slide after slide relentlessly. We're going to drumbeat through these. Joe, you're going to guide through. So you have a pretty good idea, hopefully, of what stories to tell, what yarn you're going to weave through each image. So we start with a nice sort of publicity shot of Train Sim Classic. I suppose this is a chance for you to sort of explain a bit about what these games are, right?
Yeah, exactly. And as I say, like the difference between Train Sim World and Train Simulator Classic is quite an important one to make early on. So Train Simulator Classic, as I say, it's the game that we've been involved with for a long time, since the company was first started. And it's, I wouldn't say a legacy product, because it's still very current, and we're still releasing a lot of material for it, and we have a big community around Train Simulator Classic. But it is distinctly different to Train Sim World. It's focused more on, I suppose in a way, like almost like a virtual model railway, because there's so much content to go at with Train Simulator Classic. You've got the core game, and then there's loads of like third-party add-ons made by our partner program developers, by individuals that have access to some of the development tools, and with that comes a much more kind of tight-knit community, similar to a model railway in a way, in that you've got lots of different companies, small and big, making lots of different elements for it, whether they be routes or locomotives or scenario packs, liveries, that kind of thing. And it exists just on PC, so it's Steam only. And with that, as I say, comes a more kind of centralized community around the content that Train Simulator Classic offers. So it's been updated over the years. It's changed guides a number of times, and Train Simulator Classic is the current version of what many people will know as Train Simulator. But then we, as I say, kind of branched off into Train Sim World, which was a different thing altogether, and I'll explain why shortly. But it was for still Dovetail Games, the bread and butter of what we do, and the start of really us building that trains community in the digital virtual format.
Yeah. So, and here's a rather fetching image. So, you do give me the classic sort of lecture. Next slide, please, and I shall tell the graduate at the back to adjust the slide machine. So here's a rather nice. This looks suspiciously like is it Huddersfield-y?
Huddersfield, yeah, and really it's just to demonstrate the kind of variety. I mean, obviously all of this is British in this particular screenshot, but there's a lot of locomotives there and different liveries that offer different types of gameplay. So there's obviously passenger services, there's freight, there's shunting, and I think there's over 1,000 pieces of downloadable content you can get for Train Simulator Classic. So even if you're not into British BR era, as might be depicted there, you're into German content or American content, steam, diesel, electric. There's something out there pretty much for everybody, and that's the advantage that Train Simulator Classic offers, is that with this wide community, there's this constant stream of new content coming as downloadable content, which is really exciting. So it's really just to explain a bit of the variety that Train Simulator Classic offers from a collector's point of view, almost. Yeah. Rather than Train Sim World. So yeah, we can flip straight to Train Sim World if you like. I think
yes, here we go. The shiny looking Train Sim World. Here we have an IC being subject to the impacts of climate change here, which is fun. Or actually, no, that's snow, not flood. So originally I thought it was flooding, but actually no, it's snow. It's snow. It's going through a pile of snow, which is quite interesting. Tell us about Train Sim World then. What's the difference?
So Train Sim World, first of all, it's not just on PC. So this is something available for PlayStation, an Xbox, the current consoles, PlayStation 5, Xbox Series SX, and as well as the PC platform, Steam and Epic Games. It's a slightly more what I would call like a refined train simulator game. So the graphics make use of what's called the Unreal Engine, something that's much more detailed. We can make use of like volumetric skies and lighting and different weather elements, which are clearly depicted in the sort of key art that we've got there.
Yeah.
So you can do like changeable weather. It's dynamic. There's time of day changes in some of the routes. So it's more akin, or it uses features that maybe more conventional video gamers will be familiar with, and puts the kind of Trains franchise, if you like, in that more video game sphere, rather than being a strict train simulator that's for PC only. It's broadened out a little bit, and what we find is that people that aren't even interested in trains might pick up Train Sim World, which is great because it introduces them to the wider hobby with modelling and heritage rail and photography and spotting and all those different kinds of things. But it's slightly more accessible from the kind of gamer's point of view, which is cool. Yeah,
well, definitely, and we've had an episode recently on accessibility into railway enthusiasm and even transport enthusiasm. Accessibility is good, and particularly when you've got classic in the background for people who then maybe want to dive into some of the perhaps want to pick up some of the kind of that as you say, thousands of bits of additional content. It's good. So while I move my mouse, let's hop into there we are. There's another picture. Leaves on the line.
Just to explain the sort of the core offering of Train Sim World. So we do lots of British content, modern era, which is depicted there. I think the next slide shows a lovely steam train, hopefully.
It does. Yeah, so nice.
We do period content, and we'll come back to this because a lot of the development stuff we'll be talking about historic routes in a moment. So that's worth keeping in mind. Again, flick forward. I think we probably talk about
train center.
Training center, introducing people to trains. Not everyone knows how to drive a train. In fact, a lot of people don't. And so we want to make sure that people are eased into not just our video games, but also just trains generally in a way that's kind of acceptable and that they can get on board with, no pun intended. The training center offers that. So it just gives you a bit of guidance, tutorials, that kind of thing. Some people won't even know how signaling works. If they're completely into new trains from scratch, points, switches, that kind of thing. So Train Sim World offers that because we have that training center facility.
I'm just going to say in the chat, Steve, who came up with Ice DB. For the name for that cover image from Train Sim World, well done. You win the episode. Very, very good. I think it'll be difficult to top that. So that's Training Center. As you say, this is it's accessibility, which is really good because as this picture might hint, it's all quite complicated. It can be quite complicated, right?
Absolutely.
Hence why actual train drivers are very rightly pretty well paid public servants because it's quite complicated to drive a train.
Yeah, definitely. So this just shows really, and again, this is slightly different to Train Simulator Classic, is it gives you like a first-person view in that you can actually get up and walk around like you would in a conventional video game. So you're sat in the position here. This is an American locomotive on Cajon Pass, I think. You can press a button and you get up and walk around. You can use the doors. You can get out. You can switch the switches manually. So it's a bit more immersive. You really feel like you're actually like a railway worker, an engineer, a driver. What have you. And in fact, in one of our more recent routes we did, Glossop Line, you could actually be a guard for the first time as well.
Oh, nice, yeah.
So you could use the guard panel on the class 323 and check people's tickets and that kind of thing. So it's a specific feature just for that route. We try and put people in that position so they really feel like they're part of the process and part of the industry, really, in a way.
Yeah, nice one. So, by the way, there's some great questions coming in the chat, but particularly John Christoph, you just asked a really good question. Hold that, send me it later because I want to ask it later because it's a really good question. In the meantime, okay, so we have the interior here. Right, so we're looking at this. Let's see, I see a mouse. So this is the computer. This is Train Sim World, right? This is the landing page, right?
That's right, and it's really just to represent that it is a video game, and with video game development comes things like menus and UI and introducing people to this in a very video game format rather than something specific to a train or a railway audience. So like the menus and things, all have to be developed by people that understand video games, not just trains. And that's just an example of some of the work that's done to do that. But so we can move quickly on from that.
It's quite a nice UI. I like that. Oh, anyway, it's a very fetching. I mean, these you have sent us some rather fetching glamour shots for this. It's very nice. There's Ebb's fleet with a javelin looking very fetching. It's almost like a Tom Connell level bit of railway art there. I'm sure you're familiar with Tom Connell's work. Actually, has Tom Connell done stuff for Train Sim World? Have I dreamt that? I think he might have.
No, he has. Yeah, we've worked with Tom Connell. He's a fantastic artist. In fact, we did some interviews and stuff with him as part of our We Are Rail Fans thing we did.
Nice.
Ago. He's a fascinating guy and super enthusiastic about trains. He designed the EWS logo.
He did, which is one of the cool. Yeah, the Three Beasties is one of the coolest things. I didn't realize that, and suddenly I found out, and then he sent me the SVG for it, which was very nice. And then I was like, oh well, this is the logo that all freight operations in the UK should have, and under my future marvelous nationalised system. Anyway, that's for another episode. So javelin looking fetching with the lightning strike behind, but also as you say, so that and also this rather fetching. I don't know anything about kettles. Everyone, it's a beautiful steam train from the BR era. It's nice, and again, it's all very fetching. These are in-game shots, right? And they look very fetching. Lovely lighting.
Yeah, they are, and actually they're from quite early on in when sort of Train Sim World 3 first came out. So this was to represent in Train Sim World 3. We did a lot of updates to the lighting, the weather features, the reflections on the platform, and that kind of thing, and these lovely sunset shots you can see. So it was really just to depict how things have moved on and things have developed, because we're always developing and improving these games, both Train Simulator Classic and Train Sim World, with various new bits of content that we're bringing out. So that was just to represent that, really, what we did in Train Sim World 3 for the first time.
Yeah. Here we're back at the training centre again.
We've spoken about that. We can move on, but again, it's just really a reminder that for people that are just completely new to trains and coming into this game fresh, we need to give them somewhere to start, and that's what Training Centre offers with the Class 66.
Yep. So here's an image of. Tell us what we're looking at here. This is.
So this is quite interesting. So again, for those unfamiliar, we do add-ons like we do for Train Simulator Classic and Train Sim World. So you buy the core game and then you buy the add-ons afterwards. This is Birmingham Cross City. And what's really interesting about this is University Station.
I was going to say the new University Station that has I can't even been paying attention. Have they even opened the new one yet? I
can't remember.
Yeah, I know, but it looks like this, and it's one of Britain's most crowded stations. And here is the new version having been released, having been worked up by someone quite impressively and quickly, given it only just opened. Or hasn't opened yet.
I mean, this actually came out in, I think, October last year. So we actually managed to get this in the game before the station actually was finished.
Yes. Yeah, I can believe that. Hells yeah. And so then we jump forward. Okay, so this is Master. Okay, tell us. This is a plug. This is a plug image. Go on, Joe.
It is a plug, but we can move on. So basically, we're going to be talking a lot about Peak Forest Railway from the development. So we're getting into the nitty-gritty stuff now. This is the stuff that I'm sure Matt will be scrutinising my information on, that some of which he's provided, and I've actually learned quite a lot from Matt in the last few days, sort of reading up on a lot of this stuff. But we're going to be talking specifically about Peak Forest just because of the way that we developed it and how it might be slightly different to some of the other routes that we've done. So we can quickly move on from the big
for sure
shot, if you like, and talk about the route itself.
And we're into maps, so already very happy. Our faces are on. I'm briefly hide our faces so that people can see what the text says. But it's just the route map. It's just the Peak Forest Railway route map. Now, for the eagle-eyed watchers and listeners, they'll be aware that this isn't there anymore. It's missing. It's gone, which is a different sort of challenge. When you've got lots of easy access to assets with a railway that exists, there's loads of things you can get hold of. Not so much for a railway that doesn't exist, right? Which I guess is the challenge.
Exactly, yeah. So one of the things that has been really clear about our development process for something like this, and we do historic routes and modern era routes, as I mentioned. This is probably at the extreme end of a historic route, as you say, in that it doesn't basically exist anymore. A significant portion of it doesn't. So our developers have to basically become historians for the day, or they put a historian hat on and really delve into archive material, resources, photographs, books, railway books, maps, mapping tools, that kind of thing, to really get an idea of where a railway once went. And of course, the advantage with this, so for people that don't know Peak Forest Railway, it's in Derbyshire, the real life route that is, and a portion of it is still Network Rail. So I think from Ambergate through to Matlock is East Midlands Railway Services, Matlock to Rowsley, I think it is, or Darlydale is the Heritage Railway. So I don't know, we can refer to numbers actually probably. So 1 to 6, I think, would be the Network Rail, and then further 6 to 8 maybe would be the Heritage Rail. And then from 8 onwards up to about 16, that would be the Modular Trail. So it's a cycle path, walking route. It's fantastic. I've walked it, and some photographs will show you, I think, a little bit later on. But so it's gone. There's no track bed. There's no, the stations are there as buildings, but they're not there as stations. And then towards the sort of northern end, I believe that's now freight only, or possibly a diversionary route.
There's a mix. Yeah, exactly. It's mostly quarry material going up and down there. It's very much a heavy freight route. But then the thing is, it then starts getting a bit more dense as you start approaching into the area around Manchester actually, and things start getting busy again with suburban traffic and all sorts in the current railway.
Yeah, but as you say, so this route in game is set in, I think, 1962. So when the railway was complete and the cycle trail, was not there. So there's a number of different challenges with that that come with kind of learning how that route was, understanding what the key features are in terms of buildings, signal boxes, stations, what the stations look like. I mean, we'll come on to it in a second, but Hassop Station's now a cafe, and obviously for the purposes of the in-game route, we've got to look at it as a station, and what it was like and what the facilities were around it, and how we can best represent that in games. So as I mentioned, the developers basically have to become historians, and a lot of that can involve importing things like terrain data. Like, think from a very basic level, actually, what's really good is the terrain hasn't really changed. The hills and the fields and the to a certain extent, maybe even like roads and infrastructure around it might not have changed a great deal. So things like that we can actually still get from a lot of like current data, like the topography of the land and that kind of thing. But as I mentioned, photography, any like blueprints of things like buildings, so that we can really get an idea of what's important, what isn't. They're all things that we have to basically go and look at. And for some routes, it's a real challenge because some of that material might not be there. Some archive material might be mislabeled or hard to find, or sometimes in some cases, I'm sure, probably quite expensive to get access to. And we do our best to basically try and source all the information we can from a lot of different areas, just to recreate the environment, basically. And that was the challenge with this route, having to basically piece together what that route was back in 1962 from the information that's currently available today. So
in terms of in terms of archive information, do you access, for example, the Network Rail archives for like old station blueprints and things? Is that are the developers digging in that much? And Matt might throw in another answer if you get. But Joe, because there is a huge range of archive information, right? So are you getting access to, obviously old mapping is quite easy to access, so you can get the old mapping off the internet reasonably easily nowadays. But things like, Network Rail's records are publicly available, but it's quite challenging. It's getting hold of them to get access is. So what's the range of materials that the team are accessing?
That's almost certainly a Matt question. Hopefully he can answer that in the chat. But what I will say is all those different areas will have different purposes and use, probably from our point of view. So things like, I wouldn't know, for example, where to go looking to find out where the signals were. How the signalling worked on that route back in '62, and because even if you look at the stretch that still exists now, whether it's the Matlock stretch or the quarry stretch. That's going to be like vastly different to how it was back then. The array of sidings and the way that the points work, and maybe a whole line might have been taken out if it was double track, for example. So I imagine I'm not answering your question, but what I am saying is that the different places we go to will have different purposes in mind to really try and piece together all that stuff that we need to know. Hopefully in that time, Matt might have conjured up an answer to the specific question of what we use.
Part of the reason I ask is because it's interesting how many parallels there. All of a sudden, the number of parallels between the devs and me in my day job as a railway design engineer start building up, because a lot of my time is spent building up archive data, building up geomatic data, topographical data, all this stuff. It's amazing how. So this part of my interest is looking at the overlap between the devs who are doing this stuff with the intention of creating an enjoyable experience that's true to real life, but ultimately it's still an entertainment product. It's still a product to be enjoyed. And I'm doing so much that's similar to that. They're doing so much work that engineers have to do to actually then. It's just that the reason I ask is because of those interesting overlaps. So let us jump forward from what is a fairly satisfying and interesting map to some imagery from the line, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so we can move quite quickly through these, but it's just to give you an idea of, obviously what the route looks like for those that are unfamiliar, and the different features that we've got to model, and the different things that we've got to consider when we're making the route. So you can see there, we talked about topography and the fact that that doesn't change very much, and naturally we can use that data to basically recreate the hills and where the trees are, and sort of how the cliffs fall and how steep they are, and that kind of thing. And also things like gradients, because gradients are factored in our train simulation project. So we need to know when the train's going up and downhill, and how that affects the movement and the physics and the challenge of gameplay, because that's part of the
absolutely.
And equally with the piece of infrastructure, so that lovely viaduct, we need to make sure that that's well represented where possible, and getting things like blueprints, I'm sure, is where we'd start looking for things like that. But yeah, we can quickly move through these. So
sure.
The next one, so we'll come on to Locomotive a little bit later, how we recreate the locomotives and what's required on that front. But the 4F, LMS 4F, steam locomotive, Fowler, I think is the nickname for it, or the official name for it. That's what's in this route, and like the route, everything has to be done in detail. So this slightly easier in a way, because when it's like a locomotive that's in preservation, obviously we have real-world examples to go and source from. I think there's 2 or 3 of these in preservation. One went to the West Somerset, I think, a few years ago. So so we have a kind of relevant material we can always go for things like that. And I think that's very much the case with all the locomotives. And we do research trips. It's well documented that we do research trips out to both current operators and heritage and preservation movements to get all this stuff, photography, noises, sounds, audio that we need for our content on the locomotive front, which is great. And we're always very, very grateful when companies are really happy for us to go and nose around basically and get all that stuff ready for the game.
Yeah, for sure. This is a lovely shot. You said it's the 60s, so if it's 1962, did you say that it is the era? So it's not quite winter of 1963-64, deep snow, but it's you still get some very nice seasonality going on. This is really lovely. With a what is that? It's an ISO 60 in the background, kind of the midground there, and all sorts of rolling stock, and there's oh, it's fab. It's lovely. This is the era. This is incidentally the era that my Hornby set is. Not that it's particularly extant, but because it's a fun era between all sorts of different stock and diesels and all sorts. So it's very nice. And then the mistiness. This is one of the things that Train Sim World is. I'm picking up. Then is the difference. So having not played Train Sim World, but having done a bit of dabbling in Classic. Correct me if I'm wrong on this. Train Sim World has more dynamic weather environment. Is that correct? So
yes,
yeah,
definitely. And you talked about like the era and the kind of the image with the snow and the sort of winter of 1963 and that kind of thing. We do try and recreate to a certain extent like the feel of the era. So with this, it's like what we termed as like the twilight of the steam era. 1962, things were very much being run down and kind of transitioning into that dieselization. The steam locomotives were looking tired. Some of the stations would have been boarded up. There would have been, overgrown parts of track, things that have been disused. And we try and recreate that feeling in particularly some of these period routes where we can. And equally with the modern era stuff, we make it look shiny and new and exciting, just as it would for people that are traveling on a train for the first time. It's just been introduced into traffic and that kind of thing. So in addition to like the actual practicalities of, do the stations look right and is the locomotive accurate, the feel actually in putting people back in that time, particularly for this kind of route, is really important. And I'm glad you picked up on that in a way, because it shows that the development team and the rest of the team are doing their job really well to recreate that.
Yeah. Right. So this is the fun bit where you get to go, look, it's the Monsell Trail. It's some station infrastructure, but someone's stolen the tracks. So talk to us about what was different and particularly interesting and unique about the kind of the Peak Forest Railway, given the state of the infrastructure now.
Yeah, I just think, so one of the things that I really enjoy about Train Sim World is really getting to know a route that I know personally very well. So the heritage railway I used to work for was the West Somerset Railway, and that's a route in game. And for me, playing that route it brings me a lot of joy, and it brings me a lot of feelings that some of the other routes don't, not because they're not good, but because I know it so well.
Yeah.
And for people that know Peak Forest Railway, or they know the Monsell Trail, or they might even remember back when it was running as a full-length railway, as we've tried to recreate. Actually going back into the game and understanding that and appreciating it can be a real source of joy and entertainment for people if they know that route intimately well. And so I always think looking at the real life route, whether it's existent or not, is just really important to get that appreciation. And this is Hassop Station, the one that's now a cafe, and actually the previous shot is Hassop Station in game. And a lot of people, particularly, I'm not old enough to remember when this was a running railway, but just be able to see a steam train running through that station. I know we have photographs and things, but in a way that's kind of dynamic and moving and that you can interact with is unique. It's something we're doing that a lot of other, unless it's a model railway, really, that's the only other way that you can recreate that.
It's really nice.
Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say it's really nice. It is very satisfying. It's funny you talk about the West Somerset, because my grandparents are up in North Devon, or down in North Devon, and so we would pass. My favourite way across to get to North Devon was not up the link road. It was to go via Bishop's Lydeard, Taunton, Bishop's Lydeard, and across Exmoor. And so I would pass the West Somerset Railway pretty frequently. And in fact, I had fun on the way back once when I gave Dina my wife a chance to go and stand on the footplate of a steam train in Bishop's Lydeard in the cold, which was rather good fun. So yeah, it's a fantastic heritage railway, one of the longest in the UK. I could strongly recommend. There we are. There's the West Somerset Railway plug, everyone. But it is really fantastic, and going around the coast up to Minehead, it is lovely. I particularly like some of the kind of the big BR tenderless locos. They're quite lovely, that run up and down the line. Very nice. Anyway, I digress. Point being, it's very nice, and that sense of the same reason why people enjoy heritage railways is because it's capturing that moment. That it's capturing. Yes, it's tapping into nostalgia that we all do, and nostalgia is an easy drug to consume. But actually, it's kind of more. It's tapping into a little bit more than that, I think. Particularly with simulation, in that there's. It's just grabbing that moment, that historic moment, and thinking about kind of some of the way it impacted on society around it as well. I love it. I could go off on one about it, but yeah, that's very lovely. So jumping forwards, here's another image of something rather architecturally unique. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, so this is Cromford Station. I went and walked the Monsell Trail a couple of years ago. Took a load of photos. Cromford Station is very unique. The station is fantastic. It's on the route in game. It's something that we've had to recreate. It's something you can't use kind of stock assets and stock kind of buildings and stations and things to recreate something as unique as Cromford Station. So when we're looking at recreating the key features along a route, something like this really has to stand out, and it also has to look right, because people will spot it straight away if it's a landmark of that route. Particularly in things like big cities, then they need to be recreated in as accurate as possible.
That always reminded me of the thing I used to do when I had Flight Simulator 98. And you'd fly around desperately hoping that your tiny hometown had been even slightly realistically recreated. And I just fly past it. It was just there's like two houses and a tree. There's like this is a village of 12,000, a town of 12,000 people. What the hell? And there is that sense, like it is particularly on railways. It kind of spurs me on to a question that you might be able to answer, but also Matt in the chat. How do you get that balance right? Because obviously from a project management perspective and a resource management perspective, you could spend a lot of money going to the nth degree and getting in terms of the balance between generic or repeat assets and to develop specific assets. How do you get that balance right? Is there what's the approach to make sure that you get the balance right? How do you understand where that tipping point is to ensure that the simulation feels familiar to people who know the route, but that you don't evaporate all of your development budget on the project?
I mean, again, Matt's probably going to be able to answer this better than I can.
Yeah, Matt said it's tricky. Was Matt's answer?
Well, yeah, it is. I think pointing out key features is the most important thing. And what we have to bear in mind is that there are people that will be playing these routes that both know it in and out intimately very well, and people that will be playing this for the first time. I mean, I play quite a few of the American routes, but I've only been to America once, and not to the place that's been featured in any of our in any of our routes. So I don't necessarily need that intimate knowledge to appreciate just how detailed and accurate the routes are, because they look they look great.
Yeah.
But I don't know that someone's house maybe doesn't have the right color roof or what have you. Whereas it's the key features really that we have to look at. But at the same time, we have to do our best to try and make sure that it's representative of the area, no matter where it is. And you're right. There are pros and cons, and there are things that we have to look at from a development point of view to make sure that we strike a balance there to please everybody if we can.
Yeah, Matt, just for the sake of the audio-only listeners who don't have the benefit of reading the chat, everyone here live can see that. It's very. Matt says it's very tricky to get the balance right. How much does it add? How important is it? How important are other things? What's the important bit? Is it the skyline impact? Is it the type of bricks used? The colour of the buildings? Usually stations need to be pretty spot on, but towns just need to look like towns. The church probably needs to look like the church. The skyline needs to be right. The bridges need to be roughly the right type, if not exactly the same. Actually, you touch on an interesting point, Matt, like particularly on lines like this that have distinctive station architecture because of who built it, that have also, and this is an issue in the UK, is because so much stone is used, stone is a particular... Yeah, in a town that's all using the same stone, it's harder to use generic assets, because if you've got a generic kind of blue brick house, or brick houses, and actually all the stones are made out of sandstone or masonry, that's an easy way to throw the simulation. So I can imagine that's where you make decisions, I suppose. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. This is the interesting stuff. These are some of the questions. How do you get that balance right? And so we jump from this picture to a fun one here. Go on to talk to tell us what's going on screen, Joe.
Yeah, so if there's anyone in the chat watching, listening, that's a Britpop child of the 90s like I am, you might know that Cromford Station was used on the 7-inch single vinyl cover of, I can't even remember the song now, Some Might Say by Oasis. Yeah. You probably can't see it too in great detail there, but Liam Gallagher is actually on the footbridge there waving, and Noel is pouring a watering can onto the track bed. This was during a period, I believe, where the station was closed, I think, or not in use, or maybe only one platform was in use. I think only one platform's in use now, actually thinking about it. But so used just a bit of pop culture really that I quite like because I'm a big Oasis fan. But if you know the area, you probably know that's what it was used for.
Yeah. Matt just adding a little bit of addendum there, saying, yes, we had to model new versions of identical structures just to change the Brits, etc. Birmingham Route had orange bricks in it originally, and we were corrected that it had to be blue. Absolutely. Stafford blue. Yeah, absolutely. So we see a picture of the industrial hilly north. Tell us what's going on in this picture. This is a real picture, not a simulated picture, for those who are not particularly Hawkeye.
Yeah, and the fact that we have to make that distinction is just a testament to how good a job the development team do, I think. So real life picture, again, more about the topography, making sure that the feel and and everything is right. Obviously, we have to take into account things like foliage. There's a lot more trees and stuff there than there would have been when the railway was A, first built, and B, kind of back in the early 60s or late 50s. So things like that we have to take into account. And again, photographs become really important when it comes to that kind of thing, because we'll see just how many trees there were or weren't there in previous decades. So I think the next couple of photos really just represent that. Yeah,
give that feeling, and it's a pretty distinctive landscape. But as you point out, a distinctive landscape now. As you say, there were a lot fewer trees in the 1960s to what you can see now, particularly around the railway, because they'd have all burned down if they were if there was as much foliage around the railway as there is now. Right, okay, now we're getting into some juicy stuff. So here is a rather grey-looking, detailed mesh, but song textures of a thing. What is the thing, Joe? Tell us what we're looking at.
So this is what I believe is a mesh-making max render of Buxton Midland Station. So Buxton is it's on the branch line. If you can remember the map, it was sort of the spur off onto the kind of left-hand side. And this is basically where things start. So this is all done in a piece of software called 3ds Max, which if you into 3D modeling, it might be something that you're aware of. And we have to start from somewhere. And so our team start by basically making a grey box that's a broad representation of the station that we're trying to model.
And the level of detail, yeah, so again, this is another question, because as with any simulator, there's a challenge of balancing the number of polygons of what's texture, what is modelled, and given the number of stained glass or glass paned windows, that becomes quickly your polygon count starts becoming a bit of a battle. So here's a good example of where the designers, the dev team have gone, and the modelers have gone, you know what, no, stuff it, we're doing the polygons for this window, which is really nice. There's some lovely detail there.
Exactly, and that all comes down to that balance that Matt was talking about. What are people going to be looking for on this station? If they know the station or they're aware of how detailed it was, this might be something that they're looking out for. So let's model it and let's do it accurately. The process for the modelers is sort of akin in a way, for those that aren't familiar with 3D modeling, to a bit like sculpting with a mouse and a keyboard, basically. So you start off with like a big block, and then you kind of chip away at it and put in algorithms to create certain curves and angles and things, and sort of sculpt it that way to result in something much more fleshed out and detailed than you originally had. So yeah, it's a kind of like it's a 3D virtual sculpting process, really, and that's how we get to this initial stage, which is just a kind of grey facsimile of hopefully what we're trying to model in the game.
Yeah. For anyone who wants to see this, I mean, there's loads of different videos of people modelling architecture in game, but a cross plug to Justin Rosniak, to Roz, to Do Not Eat's Franklin episodes, where you can see him modelling assets for city skylines, and you can see how you start with you use the symmetry, you have blueprints in the background. There's loads of stuff going on that allows you to create this architecture. Go from the blueprints to something 2D, essentially to something 3D, and with all the scales. It's really satisfying to watch, actually, when it's sped up, if a little trippy. And then you go here. You end up with a modelled asset with the textures brought in, and here it is. Very nice.
Yeah, so textures are 2D, and this is ready to be sort of what we term baked down. So that's sort of to do with it, I think, with how and Matt will probably correct me if I'm wrong here, but how the light interacts with the models. We have to include things like collision. So that, like if you're playing in the game, you don't walk through this building, you walk into it, because it's a solid structure. And people that are into kind of the development of broader video games will know that there are occasions where you model something maybe that you can pass through, maybe you make it invisible or what have you. And again, there's technical terms here that I don't know of, but certainly as someone that plays video games, I'm aware that there's tools that we use to make that world interactable in a positive way or a negative way, stopping you from going somewhere. You don't want to be walking through a station wall, but you do want to be walking, down potentially onto the track bed. So making sure that the platforms are interactable and that kind of thing. So so this is kind of the next stage. As you can see, the textures and the colors are included in to make the building more representative of what it should look like in real life. That's as part of that kind of baking down process to get it sort of fixed in the world, if you like, interacting with all the things around it.
Yeah, and then you can see here where the views. Once you throw it, this is the advantage of the improved overall simulation. So having more advanced game engines that we have nowadays, is that in the past, when you had less advanced game engines, you couldn't get. You had to bump up to get something looking good. You had to put a lot of detail into the model. Nowadays, yes, the models are detailed, but you can be a bit cleverer with what you put in, because the lighting is so much better simulated. So actually you get a lot more, so you can see there's a lot more visual detail coming out of, so you can actually, in a way, you can win on some things in polygons in a way that you perhaps couldn't in the past, because the lighting. But then in the same breath, and I'm sure Matt will shout at me for this as well, in other ways, because the simulator is better, because the simulation is better, you get more lighting. It exposes things that might previously have been clever tricks you could use. So I suppose the balance, it's not that you just make everything infinitely better, it's not that everything gets infinitely more detailed as the simulation quality, as the game engine gets better. But I suppose the balance of where you put detail perhaps has changed. Developers have had to change that over time. Anyway, some lovely images here, some lovely bullet rail. Obviously, that's the first thing my eye goes to. It's the track immediately, of course. Lovely bit of station architecture, or rather railway architecture, should I say, here. And here it is in action. The building we were looking at momentarily, here is in action with, and here's a rate my buffers as well. I'd give that probably a 0, as there's absolutely no coupler interface for any trains approaching. But that's another story. That's not the dev's fault. That's British Rail's fault. So. It's nice. It's good stuff. Right. Okay. So here we're jumping to something that is far more complicated. That was a building. That's reasonably straightforward and I suppose crucially static. This is this is a more complicated object we're currently looking at. Joe, tell us about this crane.
Yeah, so just quickly, we'll go through the screenshots that show basically the same process for the station. So there's nothing new there in terms of what we're talking about. Just quickly going back to the lighting, really that's all a symptom of the Unreal Engine that we use. Yeah. So we use Unreal Engine 4 in Train Sim World, a number of other video games. I think there's a couple of like Gears of War, Final Fantasy, various iterations of those franchises that use the same game engine. And again, that's like that's really where we're talking more about the gaming world rather than the train world. That's very much, you know, the gaming side of things that we need to work with, and the lighting and the way that you talked about, you know, some of the things we have to consider when everything's so detailed is all a symptom really of us moving to that Unreal Engine 4, which is very different to what Train Simulator Classic uses, and where some of that disparity is between the lighting, the weather, and all that kind of stuff. Sorry, going back to the little crane, which again is a detail that we have to include to going back to the conversation we had earlier about putting people in the era. You know, these cranes wouldn't be there now, or if they were, they're kind of preserved, and it's probably almost certainly not working. But they would have been there then, as would have been goods platforms and sidings ready for, you know, milk cartons and all that kind of thing. So we have to try and model everything that we can that's going to be representative of the era, and this crane is one of them. So as you flick through, it's very much the process. We start off with that sort of that grey model that has to be sculpted like the station, and as you say, there's much more of a challenge with something as intricate and detailed as the crane. And then we move on and we add the textures and we add the colours. And then basically put it in the environment where it gets baked, and then it interacts with everything, and we've got the finished article.
I'm only shifting around because I'm jumping. There we go. Because I want to switch up the. There we go. Yes, I've just changed the order of the images so that I can do something slightly clever. That's why I'm bouncing around and screwing things on the move. Is because I think if I do, you can sort of see the advance between the similar images, which is why I've just done what I've done. So you can see you go from untextured mesh to textures and some lighting to in situ. You can see how it advances there. Likewise with this view here, it's quite nice to see the detailing and advancing through, and then a close up with all the textures. Very nice.
Yeah, thanks for doing that, because that's really, I think that shows the process and kind of how you go from one in isolation within the program 3ds Max to actually in the game. Really good way of demonstrating that. So yeah, thanks for doing that.
And again, another object, a much loved object. Tim, are you watching? No, hopefully not, because you'll be getting very excited as we throw a signal box up. Again, a very distinctive architectural feature of the line are the signal boxes, you know. And so you see again, you can see the untextured mesh. This is interesting though, because there's bits. Tell us about the bits here. What's going on here?
Yeah, so this is where we can be clever. Signal boxes are interesting because even though many of the like main features, the windows and the roofs and the heights and things might be of a standard design, particularly if it's of a particular railway or railway company. Actually, they're all really different. They've got different numbers of levers and frames. And one of your podcasts that I've listened to in full is the one that you did with Danny Scroggins on signalling.
Danny's here, by the way. Hi, Danny, in the chat. Hello, Danny.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, he was in the chat. Popped up momentarily. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I can appreciate just how different signaling is across the whole network, as was then, as is now. And we obviously appreciate that in the development team as well, because we have to try and model all these different sizes and models and variations of signal box. So the way that we do that is we create component parts. We split everything up, and then we kind of piece them together, almost like a modular kind of. Well, I was going to say
almost like how they did it in the real world, because this is how, you know, this was essentially modular construction. This is basically how they did it in, you know, they had a set of repeat sort of schematics that they could use and create things. So it's interesting that almost you're paralleling the way that these signal boxes were constructed at the time, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, and that comes down to some of the things that Matt's mentioned in the chat, I'm sure, and that you talked about when it comes to resource and processing power and all that kind of thing, and making sure that we're using what we've got in an effective way. Actually, building signal boxes in this manner is a much more efficient use of our facilities, and making sure that we can include more in the game, because we're not taking it up by modeling, 60 different types of signal box or what have you. So that's what this is representing. It's that modular approach to building something like a signal box where there's just so many different variations of it.
Absolutely, yeah. And here's Darley signal box, very nice, with a little coal bunker next to it, and a stair level crossing, classic Midland Railway sort of footbridge there. It's all very Midland Railway. It's very nice. It's the challenge with the Midland Railway is they had a very particular architectural design language. So it's to not model it would be to not model the railway essentially. So it's a fun task. I imagine it's a really nice fun task to pick this stuff up and get that look right. My P-way judgment's coming in. That fish plate needs someone needs to come on with a P-way hammer and hammer it away from the base plate there, from the bullet chair. So I'm failing the P-way inspection there. And here it is, Ambergate North Junction, a different signal box. And this is, I suppose, these pictures to talk for you, Joe, are showing that this is a kind of a 2-segment signal box, and this is a 3-segment signal box, showing the extension of the signal box to deal with the extra point levers that we cannot see within because it's the art of magic. But yeah, also with an incredibly complicated tandem bit of S&C. Let's not talk about that. That's frightening. Marvellous. Love this. So, right, we jump forward, unless you had anything to add with the gorgeous signal boxes and some lovely P-way. We jump forwards to this pink steam locomotive.
A bright pink train. So basically, similar process really when we're creating all our different assets, so whether they're in the environment or the locomotives themselves. We start out with a block and we sculpt it and we create the model just as we do creating any other model. Matt's a real big fan of pink. If you catch any of our Train Sim World live streams when he's with his pink ears and his headphones, you know he's a big fan of pink. Yes, whenever we're modeling something, there's always a request from Matt, I believe, to make it pink, which makes
nice.
some rather funny screenshots like this one.
It's it's very fetching. I like it. I like the pink, and to be honest, it's quite good because it picks out that you can really see the shape quite nicely there. Right, okay. This now we're talking. We're into geomatics. We're into topographical survey. Here we go. Tell me things, Joe.
I've got some juicy acronyms for you, which I think hopefully you're going to enjoy. And again, Matt hopefully can give some more detail if needed. But how do we model the environment? So we actually did a little feature on this in one of our roadmap articles recently, where we talked about LiDAR. And I think we'll come on to LiDAR shortly. But previously we used what I'm reading here is our SRTM, Shuttle Radar Topography Mission, DEM, Digital Elevation Model. So I'm guessing that's maybe, and you might be able to correct me here, Gareth, the kind of stuff that you might see on like Google Earth, maybe?
Yeah, so from space, it's space stuff done from space. So the LiDAR you do from a helicopter or from drone. LiDAR is accurate to about 50 centimeters. Which is, for your purposes, pretty accurate, to be honest. But then you don't need that level of accuracy for a lot of the, for much of the terrain, you don't need that level of accuracy. So something that's done from satellite topography is good enough, or the shuttle based topography is good enough. Yeah, so which I dare say is what we're looking at on camera in screen now. Actually, that looks to me like satellite based or space stuff from up in orbit, folks. Which to be honest, it's about, and again, it's a bit like what Matt was saying earlier. It's not about getting every lump and bump correct. It's about getting the skyline correct. It's about getting where the valleys are correct. It's about getting that balance of accuracy, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think this that shot is actually from the left Rhine or Linker Rhine-Strecke route that we did, where the valley that you're going along is a crucial part of that route as far as features concerned. So actually we have to try and model that in as accurate way as possible. For the macro, as you say, the space stuff is kind of sufficient and it does its job. But in more recent times, in the last 12 months or so, we've really tried to nail down on some of the LiDAR stuff so we can really get into the nitty gritty of that much more accurate measurements, as you say. I think every meter, I think it is roughly.
Matt's coming to say this is 1 meter LiDAR. So there we go. So this is showing that extra level of detail. The basilisk there spotting that this is Linker Rheinstrecke. I suppose one of the things that's interesting, and I get, is LiDAR gives the opportunity to potentially get some of the building modeling, not just the ground mesh, but also some of the buildings and things, or at least locations of buildings to help with some of that realism. If you're going for a contemporary, a modern layout, so that's potentially an interesting option. Looking at photogrammetry, which is basically what fancy Google Earth does now in most towns and cities, certainly in Europe. Is that something, Matt, I suppose it's a question for you as well, but maybe Joe too, is that something that you're looking at for is that a tool that the developers use, not just for the ground, not just for the kind of the natural topography, but also for the built environment?
I know that it's something that we use to measure, particularly for something like Peak Forest. I know it was probably slightly easier because of the cycle route, but the trackbed, for a historic route, there's very few occasions where the trackbed has completely disappeared from all existence. There is still some kind of legacy, particularly in the UK. I know that from, as I'm sure people in the chat will, from Ordnance Survey maps, you'll see dismantled railway through a field or what have you. And that's a man-made feature. So I think, they're not buildings necessarily, but they are man-made features that we can discern from those kinds of tools, because there's still a scar left in the landscape from where they used to be.
Matt 100% agree with that. So being able to see trackbed and roadbed is a massive help for modelling. Matt says not looking at buildings yet, but at some point I'm sure. Oh, there you go. That's interesting. And lots of interesting chat. Yeah, Christoph, as our space expert, saying SRTM is radar rather than lidar. Yes, lidar, it doesn't work through the atmosphere from high up. Radar. The distinction being that the topography can be calculated to much finer spatial resolution than the observing wavelength. Yeah, very very nice. And here's this looks more spacey, low resolution, visually low resolution for this script. Tell us what we're looking at anyway, Joe. Go on.
So that, I believe, is an entire route, and I believe, and Matt will correct me if I'm wrong here, that is the Birmingham Cross City route. So I think, if that's correct, you'd have Bromsgrove at the southern extremity of that image, and Lichfield up at the Trent Valley, up at the kind of
the West Midlands, like you've never seen them before.
Well, yeah, quite. And then somewhere halfway in there is probably Birmingham New Street. So again, Matt I'm sure will correct me if that's, but I'm looking at the track map. I was looking
where's my Wacom? That's what I need. Let me get my Wacom out and I'll show you exactly where New Street is. Here. I think that's where it is. I believe that'll be where, in fact, that's, yes. Yeah, because it's probably university is down, like universities, I think, down here. People can correct me if I've got this wrong, but I believe that's New Street. Go on, everyone else, tell me off. Anyway, there we go. PHM for the nerds, marvelous. Okay, so another shot. So tell us what we're looking at here. Again, this looks even like really high quality. That lovely scarring, the lovely cliffs that we're seeing here, really nice.
Yeah, and I think this is just to represent really that something as obvious a feature of this, and I will admit I don't know which route this is from, but this is, it's an obvious feature again that we've got to model, and when it's something as detailed as that kind of like strata through the rock, again, we can get that kind of detail from those tools, which is really cool. Yeah,
definitely. And here, okay, so this looks like the difference between two different sources of information, or perhaps a difference in resolution of topo data. Tell again, what for are we exploring visually here?
So that's basically what it is. It's just a comparison to show the tools that we were using previously compared to the tools that we're using now, and basically the difference that it makes in terms of us getting that level of detail in each of the routes.
I see. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. And while we're pausing, we have a nice shot of we've hopped. Well, in fact, let me have a close look. We've hopped over to North America, I believe here. Am I wrong?
Yeah, so we're moving on a bit now. So that was, I'm afraid to say, Gareth, that was the end of the LiDAR and topography stuff.
No, I was enjoying myself so much. You could have given me an hour more of that. No, it's right that we move on and look at some track that is fastened with dog spikes, which is making the hair stick up on the back of my neck and stressing me out, and I've got beads of sweat building on my forehead. But that's my problem, not yours. So yes, let's press on. In this gorgeous sort of twilight shot here with the lovely pink sky, very nice.
So this is the Boston Providence route in America. So we don't just do British routes; we do content from a number of different countries, America and Germany predominantly. And what we got to talk signalling at some stage.
Yes,
Danny, in the chat, will be thrilled, hopefully, to hear that we're going to talk a little bit about signalling. That's got to be recreated as well, and there's a number of challenges that we have in doing that. It's a fun challenge for a number of people in the business because they're really into their signaling, but they've got to source information from other areas. So cab ride videos, YouTube, perfect example of where we can figure out basically where signaling is and how it interacts with the train as it's passing through, track plans. And I'm sure this comes back to the conversation you said about some of the material that we use, like Network Rail and all that kind of thing. Where can we get that information from? We have to get that information from somewhere so we can basically recreate it in the game. And then we've got to kind of piece it all together. We've got to make sure that the signaling is representative of real life, but also, if we're already doing a section of a route, for example, like the Birmingham Cross City route, it's only Bromsgrove to Lichfield. It doesn't go any further north or south than that. We've got to make sure that the signaling still interacts with the rest of the world that's not on that route, if you like, and kind of continue its way, giving greens to trains that go kind of off the map and all that kind of thing. So there's a load of different considerations that we have to make as far as signaling is concerned. And we've chosen Boston Provenance just because of a number of different elements that we had to consider. I've got a note here from Matt. I am reading some notes from Matt that provided me because I don't know all this stuff in great detail, but that the signaling system on the Northeast Corridor is similar to the DCC model railway system. Ooh. All the codes are sent over the rails.
Ah, interesting. Okay, there we are.
Pulse codes is what I've got here written in quotes. You get signal information put down onto the track using a technique called pulse codes.
Oh, well, Danny will know what's going on, and Melanie will know what's going on. Our previous guests who talked about signaling. I suddenly become. I do my best to learn, but I do become lost fairly quickly in the complexities of signaling. So what's interesting, what's always I've found fascinating about train simulation with is essentially your developers have to do so much actual engineering because they have to build a viable signaling system that works, that is stress tested, that functions basically from the ground up, which is, signaling engineers have to do that, and the bloody signalers are all very well paid. I can tell you this; they're far better paid than I am. So that's always fascinating because obviously you can take shortcuts. It doesn't have to be completely safety critical. It doesn't have to be completely bomb proof. All the additional fail safes that a live railway system has. But it does have to work. Like it can't break because then the simulation breaks and your people will become angry and they will shout at you and Matt. So there is again, I suppose the question is how on earth do you do that within the budget and time constraints of a simulation project? It's very, very challenging to do that, and developing a viable signaling system. I suppose not doing the whole country all at once is helpful. So having isolated routes, I suppose, does add some simplification. But to an extent, the signaling system tries to do that as well, and it's still as complicated as when you've got multiple tracks. You've got, particularly in a game when you've got areas where you've got shunting because that you want a route to do various things so people can get the enjoyment out of it. That's complicated. I've just waffled for a bit, but I hope you get my excitement of that's a complicated thing to do.
Absolutely, and there's loads of different examples in our individual routes where it becomes even more complicated because of different conflicting signaling systems that are all happening with one another. So, I mean, if people that have played Train Sim World, they may not have played with all the safety systems turned on. You can turn on all the safety systems as you would in, like they mentioned, the Class 158 at the very start. You can stick the AWS on and the vigilance and DSD and have that all interactable. And obviously things like AWS are based on the plate things in the middle of the track that obviously interact with the signaling. If it's a yellow or a red, you'll get the warning come up and you have to acknowledge it and all that kind of thing. So it's not just a mechanic in game telling you when to stop and start like traffic lights on the road. It's actually an integral part of the gameplay and the way that you interact with the train. And that it goes even more granular than that, because on the southeastern high-speed route, we've got in-cab signalling with the Class 395 HS1 train. So again, that all has to be factored in. That's a completely different signalling system. I mean, I always get confused playing that route because it comes up in kilometers per hour when you switch the overhead to the third rail to the overhead and that kind of thing. But we do routes in Europe as well, where the signaling system is very different. So the signaling is actually a really important part of the game. It's what makes part of the gameplay so authentic and challenging, because again, you can play without the safety systems on and just merrily go along your way and avoid running a red. But if you want to really go kind of hardcore and do things the way that they would in real life, then you can kind of ramp everything up, turn it all on, and that makes, certainly for me, it makes the gameplay much more interesting, much more challenging, but also much more engaging, which is great. So I think, to answer your question in terms of how we justify that from a development point of view, well, actually, it's so important to the gameplay. You have to get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. Ina, I can only apologise. Ina's saying, Gareth, why did you have to mix railways with historic mapping and game design? I can only nerd out so much as a railway historian in education. Ina, I'm so sorry. So we press on. Here is a nice image of. Actually, tell us what's happening in this image here.
So we better talk about locomotives to a degree, because ultimately that's what you're driving in Train Sim World. It's we spoke a little bit before the call, Gareth and I, about the other video games that include trains, and a lot of them are about route building or designing cities and towns and all that kind of thing. But Train Sim World and Train Simulator Classic actually are about driving trains, right? That's the whole idea. So the locomotives and the trains, the multiple units, whatever it is that you're driving, has to be recreated to a really high quality level. So this is I believe a DBBR 143, not the best on German rolling stock. And if we flick to the next image, this is what's going on inside. Yeah. So I actually learned a lot about this in the last couple of days, courtesy of Matt, and I was absolutely blown away by what this is and how this works. This is something called Simulgraph. And it's the tool that we use basically to recreate stuff that's going on inside the loco. And you might think it's very easy to assume that basically we just make it so that when you press a button, the speed increases and the noise goes up, and very rudimentary, like push button equals this result. But actually what's going on inside the locomotive are individual components interacting with one another, brakes cascading through a train as they would in real life, traction motors interacting with diesel engines to generate a number of amps, and the amps get translated into what goes through the wheels, and that translates into how it goes through just like the real thing. So we don't just simulate the result, we simulate the thing that's actually happening in the locomotive, which that blew my mind.
Well, this is what in the industry we call a digital twin. This is a digital twin, and it's interesting because we've so what's on screen here exists for example, the Intercity Express fleet in the UK. So the Class 800, the 80Xs, all have a version of this for each train running, and so they can, based on all the kind of sort of sensor inputs, they actually that fits into this. What's also interesting is in the development of the Class 91, here we are properly nerding out. They did it wasn't a digital twin because digital wasn't so much of a thing then, but they did build they basically built on the factory floor a Class 91, but kind of like this, with all the bits running, so they could get the stress testing of all the equipment and all the traction motors and everything. It's just that it wasn't in a complete train, it was all the bits and electronics out. So the idea of doing, again, we're taught the parallels between, this is in this case not infrastructure engineering, but the parallels between modern train and locomotive manufacture, rail vehicle manufacture, and simulation, the overlap, as the engineering gets more digitized, it gets closer and closer to the reality that you create for simulation. So it's really interesting to see these this, because an image like this, precisely like this, was put on the screen at last year's Northeast Rail Engineers Forum for the Class A2Xs, showing what their digital twin looks like. So it's really interesting to see these parallels, because again it's testing things like the internal interlocking, that like if that's pressed you can't do that, or vice versa, which I think you can see some of that logic actually in the image on screen. So it's really interesting to see this. I'm really glad you sent this detail through. Thanks, Dovetail. It's really cool.
Yeah, and so there is one of our roadmap articles from a couple of years ago, and Matt may well be able to find the URL. If not, we can maybe provide it somewhere afterwards. But you can actually have a look at this in full resolution and zoom in and see all the different bits and bobs that are happening. So you can really get into some of the detail. If we move forward, there's another example. Again, sort of just flicking.
Oh, there we are. I love it
for a moment.
Britain's best locomotive. 47. People shout at me when I tell them that. It's the Class 47. And again, it's the same thing, right? You've got this digital twin, as I'm calling it. Here it is.
Yeah, so I've actually got some notes here that just tell you what some of the bits are. So on the, I'm told on the left-hand side, in the coloured boxes, you're looking at the brake system with support for both air and vacuum brake systems, linked over via the distributor, air ultimately to the brake linkages in the axles themselves. Distributor.
So yeah, you've got brake pipe in red there, vacuum pipe in pink, exhauster. I'm reading as best I can from what I can see. Main reservoir system, main reservoir pipe, and then all of these things all feeding in here into the distributor, which is then feeding into whatever these are, and then splitting out into various systems here, and then out into the output here, which I suppose could be wheels. I mean, you can say, or actually possibly these are wheels. I'm not sure, but you can say, sorry. Anyway, continue your Odyssey, Joe. But yeah, you can see. I was just annotating from what I can read on screen, which people watching might not be able to read. But yeah, you can sort of see the tracing there. I'm going to get rid of all my John Maddening there. It's gone.
No, that's good. It's pretty good that you're following it through. So on the right-hand side, that's I've got here the fuel tank, diesel engine, generator, and traction motors themselves ultimately connected to the axles. And this is where I started to learn some stuff in the last couple of days. Really, is just a humble brand manager that doesn't have anything to do with development. Was the idea that once you've got all this set up, particularly where there's locomotives that are some way related to one another or of a similar kind of standard design or have you, you can kind of edit all these things individually to cater for the unique features of the different locomotives. So Matt's kindly provided me here with an example, the Class 31, which is a loco add-on you can get, I think, for one of our routes, and you can drive on the West Somerset Railway, I think, has a wheel arrangement A1A, A1A, where the centre axles are unpowered. So in that example, you just find the bit, the part of the simulgraph kind of system that links the power to the axles, and just kind of delete the bit that goes to the middle axle because they're not needed, and because it's simulated to the degree that it is, where it's really quite detailed and links to those components individually, you can afford to do that and get a really realistic result as a result of doing those things.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see under the hood, as it were. Right, we are reaching pretty well in time. Reasonably well in time, actually. So we have we've got some images on screen here. Some little tease images. Tell us what we're looking at.
Yeah, not so much teasers, really just a representative of the different kinds of content you can get for Train Sim World. So we've talked a lot about the British stuff. We've talked a lot about the historic stuff, so Peak Forest, and like we showed the VR Blue there, we do routes that are representative of certain eras, but we actually do a lot of modern image stuff as well, and actually we find that they're some of our most popular routes. So not just in the UK, but also in Germany and America. You can see the Amtrak Sailor there, bottom right, and in fact there's a giant Amtrak train behind me, the ACS 64.
Yeah, people were querying the Amtrak train, but in fact, if I very briefly go big, everyone, you can see the Amtrak train there, looking very nice in the background, very shiny. Love the job.
Yeah, and we actually had when Train Sim World 2 came out, we actually had number 662, I think it was, of this locomotive painted with the logo on the side of it. I don't know whether it's still running. I know you can buy a model.
That's cool.
Which is quite cool. Yeah. So so basically just to represent that we have lots of different content, lots of different regions, lots of different eras, and I think we maybe highlight a couple of my favourites in a couple of slides.
Oh, here we go. Okay, right.
So this is Spirit of Steam. So showing this really because it's also another period route like Peak Forest. It was set in 1958, runs between Liverpool and Crewe. A lot of the techniques and modelling and considerations for the era and the buildings and the signal box modulation, all that kind of stuff is just as relevant for this route as it was for Peak Forest. And in fact, we actually did a lot of work in this that was then relevant to Peak Forest because it was of the same kind of era and time and the it's LMS content as well. So if if the Peaks Forest stuff interested you, it wasn't a route in isolation. We did do another route that used a lot of those processes and techniques before that, and it was very popular. It was our first steam locomotive route for Train Sim World.
Okay. I want to just say how beautiful the track looks here. Yes, the rolling stock is obviously glorious, but the shined running band on the rails catching the light in the way that it is, it's a testament to the modelling. It's a testament to the to the engine, the game engine. It looks very good. It just looks very good. It's a very authentic, visually authentic looking shot. The lighting is fantastic, but getting the infrastructure right, because ultimately when you're sat in the cab, that having done cab rides, the two rails going off, particularly in crap weather, those two shiny lines disappearing off in front of you, often 2 or 4 of them ahead of you, is quite a distinctive thing. That's quite an important thing about getting the feel right, and it looks really good. So the next image is about Train Sim World compatible. Talk to me about what this is telling us. What's going on?
Yeah, so when we brought out Train Sim World 3, that's the latest version of Train Sim World that you can buy. But there was previous versions of Train Sim World 2, and the original Train Sim World as well. And one of the things that we've always tried to make sure we do is make sure that people's existing back catalogue of content can be compatible with the current version of the game. So all of our historic Train Sim World routes that we've released for previous versions are compatible with Train Sim World 3, and it just means that you can carry on playing the routes that you love. It means I can play the West Somerset Railway route in Train Sim World 3, even though it came out from a previous version of Train Sim World. And it's just a really important thing to remind people, because sometimes when we release a new version of a game, people think we've forgotten the previous version, and it's not the case, because the content is very, very much still playable in the current version, and it's just always worth reminding people. And it adds to that back catalogue. It just adds to that diversity of content that we've got, which is good.
Yeah, lovely job. So, before so that I don't forget myself, I'm going to remind myself exactly what the next. Okay, yeah. So we have. Okay, fine, good. Just reminding myself what's left in the deck. Here is a rather fetching, blunt-nosed peak. Now I can tell you what's going on here, because that stone aqueduct bridge thing with the railway having water going over it, and then it goes over a canal. And this is the eastern end of Stanage Tunnel. Tunnels, actually, plural. What's happening in this image, other than it looking quite distinctively accurate, so I can tell you exactly where it is, which is always very pleasing.
I mean, that in itself is good. Again, testament that what we're doing is good, that you can recognise it. Really just, again, trying to cater to different audiences. So there's going to be a number of people out there that are looking for BR Blue content of a certain kind of... dirty is the wrong word, but kind of run down of its era. And again, that's something that we try and recreate. It's not just the locomotives and the locations. We really try and get the feeling of that kind of what it was like to be on trains and run trains and work with trains at that particular time. And I think we did that really well with the Northern Transpennine route, which again is one of our compatible routes from a previous version of the game, but you can still get it for Train Sim World 3. And actually, what's really great about this route is it interacts with a lot of other content. So locomotives from other routes will be playable on this route, and kind of adds to the timetable, adds to the experience. It means that there's lots of different interaction between different trains and locomotives, different kinds of services, shunting, freight, passenger, all that kind of thing. So if you're a fan of BR Blue, we've got something for you. Oh, that rhymes. Oh, we should use that as a tagline.
Yeah, there you go.
I'll write that down as brand manager, right? Yeah. And then this is really a personal thing for me. The West Somerset Railway is also one of our legacy routes in Train Sim World. And for me personally, it's just so great that a railway that I know so well, having worked on it, is in the game, and I can go home and relive my days working on a heritage railway. But what's also really great about the West Somerset Railway route is you can run pretty much any train on it, and it kind of makes sense as long as it's not electric.
Yeah, because because the West Somerset has always had nonsense running up and down. There's always some. They've had HSTs with like one coach between them. They've had power cars with like one or two coaches between them. There's all sorts of rubbish used to run up and down the West Somerset. So you can authentically run anything on there, as you say, as long as it's not relying on electric traction. It's great. I love this shot. So this is Minehead, right?
That's Minehead. That's right.
So I've stood on that platform and I've looked out towards the castle, which is kind of round the corner a bit, and watch it and onwards. And it's a pretty iconic bit of. It's a pretty recognisable. But this is the north, the kind of the North Somerset coast. This is a very distinctive landscape, and again, it's just nice to. This is what's fun about simulators is that familiarity. You get that nice feeling of like, oh, I'm familiar with this, because I spend a lot of time in Linton Limwith, which is like a few tens of miles behind us from where we're stood, where the camera is stood. And it looks like this. It's even the terrain is even more hilly and even more stubby straight into the sea. But this is what it looks like. It's very nice to see. Yeah, it's lovely.
It's something I really enjoyed doing recently. We do our live streams for Train Sim World, and I was asked if I would guest on a stream where one of our community managers, Alex, actually drove the route, and I almost commentated on it. Like a bit of like a tour guide in a way.
Yeah.
And again, like all the things we talked about, the environment and the topography and the buildings and the scenery. Like for me, if there's someone that's going to pick out faults on the West Somerset Railway route, it's going to be me, and I can't pick out any because it's so good. And it's just great to have that familiarity. And you're right, that's absolutely part of the simulation genre. We're in that game, we're in that realm, in that genre, because we need to make things accurate and for people to recognise all the stuff that's in it. And I just think we do a really good job. And I'd be interested, because I played Train Sim World before I joined Dovetail Games, just to play the West Somerset Railway route. And so for me, it's just a reminder really of just how good a job we do. And I'm sure there are people in the chat and people watching this that have routes that are close to them, hopefully ones that we have recreated in game, whether it be in the UK or somewhere else. And I'd really encourage them to just go and have a go, or just watch a live stream and see how the accuracy kind of plays and what they recognize, because it does something. It makes you kind of reminisce in a way about your home or where you live or where you work. I just think that's great.
Yeah. I'm just waiting for someone to do the Aberdeen Inverness route, because that's of any route that I used to do a lot as a kid. That was my home railway. So if anyone out there, I don't think it's out there in DLC, but if anyone, because it never ran anything particularly interesting. But if anyone out there wants to nerd out and create the rather niche bit of mixed railway between Aberdeen and Inverness, then be my guest, and then I can nerd out about the line between Inverness and Huntly. Anyway, I digress. That's right. We land upon the final slide in the deck. Tell us about Dovetail Direct.
So we figured that maybe the most asked question, particularly people that aren't familiar with our stuff, might be, when are you doing this route, or what's coming out next, or what can you tell us about the future, and all this kind of stuff. And the answer to all of that is we can't, because we like to keep it top secret. But we do have news announcements, and we do talk about Train Sim World and kind of what's coming, basically, or what we're working on and that kind of thing. So we've got some news around Train Sim World. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but if you want to tune in on August the 22nd at 1 o'clock, you can find out, and that's our event, Dovetail Direct.
August 22nd. Tune in, everyone. That's an exciting one. Before, in fact, I will do the outro plugs, and then we'll come back for a couple of questions. So get your questions in now. John Christoph, chuck that question back in the chat. And at my name, if you at my name, it goes in red, and it's really easy for me to see the questions. So do that, and then we'll ask Joe, and possibly Matt can pick up any questions that Joe and I can't tackle either. Before we do that, though, I must first of all. Joe is say thanks, but we'll do a proper thank you momentarily. This is basically me padding so that I can do a bit of a deck change to do this, which is thanks to everyone who's listening to this in audio only format. Obviously, this is you can listen to this on all good podcasting platforms. It goes out fairly shortly after, within the week following the recording. The usual plugs, patreon.com/Gareth Dennis to support more of this sort of thing happening. PayPal.me/Gareth Dennis for loose change and abuse. GarethDennis.co.uk/Discord. By the way, for people often say, why do you have the PayPal thing? It's because some people don't want to do a subscription thing, but they do want to say, thanks, I enjoyed that episode. So that's what the PayPal's for. GarethDennis.co.uk/merch for merchandise. Weird, I have merchandise. I don't know why, but lots of you buy it. Wings and Strings is here. Hello, that's very exciting in the chat. Hello, Wings and Strings. GarethDennis.co.uk/Discord for the Discord chat, where there's lots of people who are in the chat currently, will continue to be in the chat saying hello. So there are a few questions coming in, which is very exciting, but I'm going to wait for a second. Firstly, so there are a few pre-records coming up, folks, and to encourage you to watch the pre-records, there are some Steam keys for Train Sim Classic and some DLC. So there will be a competition for you to win those, so pay attention to the next few episodes, particularly the series of episodes, of which next week's is the first, which is episode 179, then 181, then 183. I think that's right, which are a three-parter of me travelling down the Belgrade Bar Railway. The third one I need to finish editing, actually, put up. But part one, Belgrade to Užice. Anyway, watch those, because within those will be things that you will be questioned upon in order to win some Steam keys. Thanks to the cool person who watches Rail Natter, who gave me those Steam keys to do this competition about 12 hours ago. That's a fun way to convince you all to watch some pre-records. Anyway, with all that chat, let's return to Joe, who's patiently been waiting. So we've had a few questions. I'm going to ask the first question that popped up, which is from Wings and Strings. Hey Gareth, quick question. A lot of folks can be picky about the regions modelled, but what would we consider to be core elements of train sim games that can unite both the US and UK/European markets? Ooh, it's a question for all three of us, I guess. What unites them? I suppose getting things like signalling right. So I suppose, whilst you might have different signalling systems that function in different ways, my perception is that, okay, the locomotive, getting the locomotive right is pretty universal. But I suppose that's quite straightforward to, you pick the locomotive from the region and you get that locomotive right. Whereas getting signalling systems right is pretty universal. You have to get the logic of that signalling system working right. But I don't know, Joe, what do you think? That's a good and fiddly question, that. What works across regions to make sure that what are the core elements that work across regions to unite those markets? Joe, as a brand manager, Joe, you might actually have quite a lot of thoughts on that.
I do, yeah. So I can't answer for the UK, US in particular, but I know, for example, so we don't have any Asian content in our game, and there's a number of reasons for that, which we've detailed in other places. We won't talk about that now. But what we do know is that high-speed routes are very popular in Asian regions. We have a lot of Asian players that play our game. And so Southeastern High Speed, Class 395, LGV, Mediterranean, the French route that we did with the TGV duplex, I think is the locomotive in that. Routes like that sell really well, and players really love playing them in Asian regions, probably because high-speed rail is the kind of thing that they're into, I guess. So that's an example where I suppose the appeal of the high speed kind of transcends the region. It's UK and it's French, but because it's relevant to maybe a Japanese player, actually that they enjoy playing that. So that's really that's probably one of the clearest examples that I'm aware of from having worked at Dovetail, where we know that something appeals from one to the other and kind of crosses that boundary. But I'm not entirely sure about UK, US. I suppose kind of going further from that, some US locomotives like this one. This is a Siemens locomotive, I think. So again, if it's got relevance, maybe if we haven't modelled a certain locomotive in a certain region, but this is the closest thing you can get to it, maybe this route, this would be New York Trenton route, I think this is from, might appeal to someone in a different part of Europe, maybe because it vaguely resembles the Siemens locomotive in their region. I don't know that specifically, but yeah. So that kind of thing, I guess, is one way in which content from one place is relevant to an audience in another place.
So, Mastertrams asks, have you ever done fictional routes? Because you've done an awful lot of real-life routes which look amazing. I think I know the answer to that, which is yes. But, Joe, go on.
Yeah, we have. So we did it. We've done a couple in Train Simulator Classic, but we've done one in Train Sim World that we released for Christmas last year, the Holiday Express. So that used a real locomotive. It was the F7, the F unit. If you're an American fan, you'll know what that is. Big, kind of like bullnose thing. The one in Clinchfield Railway kind of looks a bit like a rhinoceros, I think. It's kind of like the circle on the front of it. Anyway, so yeah, we did Holiday Express where you whiz your train around a living room. So all the stuff we just talked about, accuracy and scenery, just thrown in the bin, because all we had to do was recreate someone's living room, basically. Giant chairs and sofas and a fireplace and that kind of thing. So yes, we've done a fictional route in Train Sim World, Holiday Express. You whiz yourself around a living room in an F7.
So the Basilisk asks, does Dovetail think that the problems in the UK railway have impacted sales in the UK? I suppose that's kind of saying, okay, the railways in the UK are in a bit of a mess at the moment. Has that caused any? Have you seen any problems or lack of it? My guess is it might cause the opposite, is people want escapism from the mess that the current system is in, or there's strikes and they literally can't get a train, so their escape is to hop into Train Sim, perhaps. Yeah, I don't know. Have you seen any particular? Has there been any? Have you seen any connection between the state of the current UK rail network and interest in the game? No, that looks like a no, everyone, which is good.
It is a no, really. Yeah, I mean, I can't think of anything. I mean, if anything, as you say, it probably does the opposite. And when the rail's in the news, like anything really, whether it's music or films or whatever, when something that's related to the business you're in is in the news, that's usually good.
Christoph, John Christoph et al. Because they just posted, they just finished and submitted their PhD. I believe that John Christoph, is that right? Shout at me if you're not. From earlier, what are the challenges? Right, this is an interesting one, and it's one that both of you have thoughts on, both from a marketing perspective, a brand management perspective, and from a technical perspective. What are the challenges of combining a train simulator? So operations in discrete scenarios with a kind of a tycoon type game, because network management. Because as far as John Christoph is aware, no game has actually combined both. So you get rail tycoons, you get the transport fevers, you get that sort of thing. You get the train sim, the really high, super detailed train simulators, but no game seems to do both of those things. So any thoughts on why that might be, or any particular challenges that prevent it? Someone else in the chat earlier suggested that it's the different time progression. So in a scenario simulator like your products, it's real time, right? Whereas in a tycoon, if it's real time, you don't get much, not much changes and not much gets done. But there might be some thoughts. Joe, you might have thoughts from a marketing perspective on whether are they different markets? We talked a bit about this before, that you and I both also, you've got you have an interest in town planning. I have an interest in anything to do with strategy and strategic view of transport, and so that lends itself actually to the tycoon side of things. But it's a different. Would you say it's a different market, or
I think there's a number of different things there. So one is there are two very different styles of gameplay, different audiences will play those games. And I think by implementing elements of one into another, you're potentially detracting, I think, from someone who's really into that top-down tycoon style game, knowing that there's a complicated element that all of a sudden they've got to learn how to drive it. Might not be appealing to them. And equally, if we implemented something tycoony into our strict and highly detailed simulation game, that might put people off. The people that at our core that really want to play the simulation game. And I was thinking, because we spoke a little bit before we came on air about SimCity, and I know there was a version of SimCity 4 where you could drive a car, and I never did that. I liked playing the game as it was, and I liked building the cities and doing all the town planning and managing the finances. The idea of driving a car around my own city just didn't interest me whatsoever. So that's, I suppose, a kind of watered down example of where a game has tried to do that. And I just don't think it works. And I think we do what we do really well, and the SimCities and the Railway Tycoons do what they do really well. And I think probably mixing the two is probably not something that would work in my view from a marketing point of view.
There's quite a lot of interesting thoughts, and Matt's dropped a few thoughts in as well. The fact that a driver wants to be driving real trains in real routes, but as a tycoon game you're kind of making it up and want to get away with, as Matt puts it, nonsense for a few more bucks of income. Hey, that's not what we do in our tycoons, Matt. It's actually some really interesting discussion going on in the chat, as ever. Mike Wooldridge asks, Joseph, Matt, thanks for this evening, really interesting. Quick question, has anyone considered exhibiting at the National Railway Museum? Joe, have you considered exhibiting at the National Railway Museum or doing anything? Have you done any collaborations with the museum, actually? Anything?
So we were at King's Cross last year for the event that kicked off the centenary of Flying Scotsman, because we did a scenario pack, Flying Scotsman scenario pack in Train Simulator Classic. So we worked with the National Rail Museum on that event. We were at King's Cross for 2 days, had a great time. We interviewed a few people from the NRM, got them playing Train Simulator Classic. That was really good fun. Something like that we would always consider. We've done Worley as well, National Model Railway Exhibition. In the past, we've attended that a few times, and that's always really popular. People love to come and see us there. We've worked with the NRM on Train Simulator Classic, and we do exhibit in railway situations outside of video games. There's a few, conscious of time, so I'm gonna wrap up. There's a few points that jumped out, which is Matt points out that fictional routes are hard. I bet they are, because you have nothing to base it on. It's just quite the advantage of a real world route, even a historic one, is that there is it existed. You've got lots of reference, and suddenly you've got to do a load of. You can kind of I can imagine that becomes complicated, having kind of, unless you're building it up from looking at, basically, to make fictional stuff look real, you've got to basically think about the history of it, and that becomes really complicated and can be quite time consuming. Absolutely. Also, apparently it took ages to do the living room, says Matt. So he's defending the living room. Time progression applies too in relation to John Christoph's question. Let's see, what else have we got? There we are. So some people saying what we need to have is a container simulator. Well, maybe the box in simulation. You see the box behind me, actually, over there. We need a simulation game for the box. Right. Okay. I think that's the wrap up of the questions. Joe, thank you so much for your time. That's been an absolute pleasure. Everyone in the chat, including Matt, I hope get well soon. Everyone at Rail Natter Towers and in the chat, I'm sure, wishes you well. Joe, thanks so much for holding fort and doing a fantastic job of it. That's been absolutely brilliant. I've learned a lot. I've got very excitable and jumping around about the overlap between, and to be honest, that overlap's only going to grow as my discipline and my engineering, kind of infrastructure engineering, gets more digitized. It's only more interesting to see how much simulation and the real world overlap. And also pester infrastructure engineers, because the chances are nowadays we've got loads of modeled stuff that you could probably get off us reasonably easily to make your lives easier. And in fairness, possibly vice versa, actually. It's like, some of the level of detail you've got there would be quite good for me to steal and use in some of my drawings. Anyway, I digress. Joe and Matt and Dovetail Games, thank you so much. Everyone in the chat, thank you to you. It only remains for me and Joe to vigorously wave you off. Everyone, cheerio! Cheerio!